now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:36 now as the bloodbath of our morning program continues. It's not pretty. It is an absolute virtual bloodbath. At 8:05, Mike Litterist will join us on the Cherry Blossom, surprising everyone with an early arrival yesterday. And then at 8:35, Scott Smith, dad out in Loudoun County, will give us his take on Loudoun School Board shutting off the cameras. Because transparency.
Unbelievable.
I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, Julie. And it's going to be a great morning at the Supreme Court where the arguments will be made on an incredibly important case. We told you about this when it first started coming down. This is the state of Missouri. It's Missouri v. Biden. You got to like that. And Jenin Younes is a litigation counsel at New Civil Liberties Alliance. And maybe she can break this down, but the nut of this case is the state of Missouri arguing that the federal government colluded through its agencies with social media companies to censor free speech in America. That's basically it, right?
Yeah, that's basically it. A couple of minor corrections. First, it's now called Murphy versus Missouri because the government lost in the court below, so now they're appealing. So Murphy is the Surgeon General. And
thank you. Sorry
so
about
switched
that.
Around.
All right.
It's also Missouri and Louisiana, and we represent private plaintiffs, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, Aaron Cariotti, and Jill Hines, who the first two of whom wrote the Great Barrington Declaration.
Yes,
but
Martin Kulldorff was just on our show last week. Listeners will remember he got fired from Harvard for telling the truth, just like he got censored. And this had to do with professional medical experts giving their contrary opinion on COVID-19 pandemic protocols, right?
Yes, that's right. And I think that's one reason this case is so important is it sort of highlights why we have a First Amendment. What you had in this case was top scientists. Jay is an epidemiologist at Stanford. Martin is an epidemiologist at Harvard, who, by the way, is one of the most cited vaccine safety specialists in the world. Mm-hmm. And these guys were censored ultimately at the behest of the United States government for having views about COVID lockdowns, vaccines, mandates that differed from the administration's and the government line.
And by the way, again, the arguments are being heard before the Supreme Court today, and for it to get to the Supreme Court, it means there have been appeals. At this point, has the Biden administration, have they won at any level of the judicial system?
Not really. They did get a stay. So the Fifth Circuit, that's the court right below the Supreme Court, their order hasn't actually gone into effect, and the Supreme Court granted the stay. We don't know why because they didn't explain. They just granted it. Often courts will do that when it's a very big case. The government is, the government is saying, like, just keep the status quo going. That it's too important, and it's going to take a while for you to look at all the evidence here.
What is the argument that the government is making for this censoring? And of course, I suspect they're saying this is private companies and they can do what they want when really there's collusion here with these private companies actually doing what the government wants. So, but I'm curious, how are they going to defend this?
Yeah, so just to be clear, there are sort of various theories under which we allege the companies sort of became instruments of the government. And case law is very clear that the government cannot use private companies to accomplish what it can't directly. Otherwise, there'd be no point to the Constitution. They can't just hire a private company to go break into your home and search it without a warrant or whatever. So we're alleging, in addition to collusion, also coercion. There was quite a bit of coercion going on, especially from the Biden White House, where there were explicit threats being made that if you guys don't do this, if you guys don't censor vaccine misinformation, we're going to come after you, including looking at Section 230, which protects the companies from liability and antitrust laws. The government's response to this has mainly been, we were just helping the companies enforce their own policies. They've also argued that the government has speech rights and that we're infringing on the government has a right to, certainly the president can get up from his bully pulpit and say, I think companies should do X, Y, and Z in order to be good citizens. And companies are responsible for the spread of misinformation. It's their obligation to take down posts that spread vaccine misinformation.
But of course, in this case, the irony is it wasn't misinformation.
Right.
That's the other part that's
that is
quite ironic. But on the principle of it, and again, listen, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't even graduate. I didn't go to college, let alone graduate college. So maybe this stuff is too complicated for me. But I've always thought free speech is pretty simple. And Congress not being able to pass laws that infringe on an American's free speech is pretty simple and basic. So let me ask you a simpleton question, and you can explain it like a lawyer. There's no way Congress would ever be able to pass a law empowering the federal government to do what they did here, right? There's no way. Or if they tried to, it wouldn't pass constitutional muster. It would get struck down. So if Congress can't pass a law that sets this up, how on earth can the executive branch unilaterally, without a law, just go ahead and do this? That sounds even worse than Congress passing a law.
You made a perfect argument. And the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech in the press. But it's clear that applies to the executive, and the executive wasn't initially included in the language because the executive's not supposed to be making law.
Yeah, it didn't even occur to the founders that the Constitution. It's not like George Washington and Alexander Hamilton said we should probably throw executive in there. George is like, don't worry, the president would never do this.
Yeah, exactly. And also, just to sort of let you know what the response is to the arguments that they're making. I mean, sure, the president can use his bully pulpit to say, I think greenhouse gas emissions are too high and companies have an obligation to do something. But that's different because there's no constitutionally protected interest that's being infringed. Here, the government is using its bully pulpit and private backdoor channels, by the way, because there was lots of bullying behind the scenes, in order to infringe on the constitutionally protected rights of Americans. So it's not like, other areas where the government uses its influence to try to accomplish the policy that it thinks should be in place. So I think that's a very important principle that I hope the court will establish.
So other than the American people knowing and seeing exactly what went on here and the dangers that are opened up by allowing the government to interact with and agencies of the federal government interacting with these companies to silence people's speech, what's the remedy here? If you are to win, what is the end result? Is there a punishment? Do people get fined? Do people go to the jail for this sort of thing?
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
What we're asking for is declaratory and injunctive relief. So that's basically saying we want courts to recognize that this is a First Amendment violation and to enjoin the agencies and the White House from doing this in the future. So saying, like, you can't do this. And then in the future, if government officials were to continue this sort of conduct, because the law has been clearly laid out, people would be able to sue for damages. So now there's something called qualified immunity, where if the law is a little bit fuzzy, they can sort of say, we didn't realize this violated the First Amendment. I think that's garbage.
Yeah, I'm with you. So are you actually, Ms. Younes, are you going to be participating in the arguments today?
I'm not going to be arguing it. The Solicitor General of Louisiana is, but I will be there, and I've been heavily involved in the case for a couple of years now.
Who are you going to be watching most today? Who's like on your radar?
Yeah.
So, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas have all alluded to the fact that they agree with our case and various opinions that's been mentioned. So the other six are sort of the question marks, with the Chief Judge, Amy Coney Barrett, and Gorsuch. Sorry, not Gorsuch.
Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh, yeah. Being the big question marks. But, Justice Jackson actually asked some questions in a sort of similar case, the net choice cases, I don't know if you're familiar with, about whether Texas and Florida could enact laws prohibiting censorship on social media platforms.
Sure. Yeah, I do remember.
Yeah, she asked some questions that indicated more agreement with our position than I would have expected. So we'll see. And Kagan can be very good too. These are smart people. So I hope they see through what the government is doing here, and this is a very, very important case for the future of free speech. As
people who are in the business of expressing our opinions and sometimes being on the wrong side of the government's approved of messaging, we appreciate you fighting this fight. Very much so. In fact, by the way, your counterpart, the Americans for the ACLU, where do they stand on this? I'm sure they've written an amicus brief on your behalf, right?
They very glaringly did not write an amicus brief. We got 28 actually, which is quite a lot. And FIRE wrote a really good one. a number of other organizations, but the ACLU did not.
Wow, shocking.
Jenin, I also want to say that for those who sometimes can feel pretty down about there not being any accountability for what happened during COVID, this is a big shining moment where actually some of the stuff that did happen, like the censorship on really important issues like the vaccine, this is really a step in the right direction, and one of the rare cases of something happening that will prevent the same thing happening next time. So thank you so much.
Amen to that.
Oh, thank you.
And let's
Thank you so much for
let's
having me.
bankrupt the ACLU if they can't jump on board for this. It's time for a new sheriff in town. It's called the New Civil Liberties Alliance, NCLU. Just replace that A for N. Thank you, Jenin. Enjoy your day today. It's a big one.
Thank you so much.
7:47, time to get to Jim.